But what's really interesting, and this is sort of building on our AI discussion, was how far AI agents and agentic commerce has moved the needle on de minimis thinking, not just for crypto, but for Bitcoin. And you watch the Wheels Turning and Hill staff that you talk about Bitcoin and centralization of payments and what agentic commerce is going to look like. And you get nods like, yeah, Bitcoin maybe actually makes sense. There's been not a lot of reasons to be bullish lately on anything. This is actually going to be bullish on crypto tax, believe it or not.
All right. Well, I guess skip the normal intro for the week. I think everybody at this point knows Ken and Zack here from BPI and myself, Zack Cohen here. I realized last week that was our 31st episode. That's crazy. I guess, Ken, you haven't been here kind of the whole trip, but Shapiro and I, 31 episodes deep. That's pretty good. And Ken, you're doing great, buddy. Really appreciate you jumping on.
I want to thank you and everyone in the chat for tuning in and doing the thing. It's been awesome. Awesome.
Well, so Ken, word on the street is that you use Claude with Sonnet instead of Opus. Would you like to respond to those allegations?
I inadvertently, ran some skills in Sonnet, and I sent a screenshot to my friends and colleagues and friends saying, "Hey, look what I'm doing." And I was like ferociously attacked because it wasn't on Opus. I switched it.
Yeah,
the word disgusting was used. Disgusting was used. So it was pretty intense.
This wasn't an isolated incident. The fact that you were doing an abacus to calculate just pretty basic numbers was also a warning sign that the level you were at. But the Sonnet thing, honestly, is more offensive.
I want to stay off, offline, off the grid if possible. Now I have Claude Cowork has an access to a folder on my desktop. It's a lot.
Yeah, our national secrets are going to get leaked. So we know who to thank when all that comes out.
I know, but I'm trying to follow. Man. I'm trying to follow the work of Zack Shapiro every week and learn how to use this stuff correctly. So I'm doing my best. Yeah,
Zack, you had a new article. You want to update us on what was in there and how it went?
Yeah. So I tried to write one article as much as I felt comfortable sharing in public, because I also intend to monetize this, how I actually use AI. And some of the stuff we've been talking about internally at BPI, which for the listeners here is making a pretty incredible effort to lean into being fully AI native, right? With modern AI and Claude and skills and repeatable workflows. And I just think that that's going to put any organization, including BPI that does that, just way out ahead in terms of what you can do in your output and just the leverage each individual person can have. And I've been a power user of this tech in some ways for 2 years, but the sort of modern agentic tools since they came out in January of this year. I think the secret sauce at the high level boils down to two things. First is creating good prompts, and creating good prompts breaks down into sort of a mental model of learning how to speak to the AI in a way that is detailed and specific. Detailed meaning that you need to add all of the context that the model doesn't know. People in Bitcoin might be familiar with the Oracle problem, which is sort of a conceptual problem for how do you get things that are outside of the blockchain into the blockchain, and it's very difficult. The sort of AI equivalent of that is the context problem. LLMs have been trained on a lot of stuff, but they can't read your mind, and so you have to translate everything that's in your mind into the AI. Now, it doesn't need to be organized. It doesn't need to be eloquent. You can just free associate into the microphone on your phone for 10 minutes at a time as a way of doing that, and say things over and over again. And, you can mash your hands on the keyboard and have lots of typos and grammatical mistakes. It doesn't need to be pretty, but you do need to get the information in. So that's the detail part. And then the specificity part is LLMs are a fuzzy technology. They're trained on the entire corpus of the internet. And when you don't specify exactly what you want, they're going to give you sort of the median output of the internet, which is what we have all come to know as AI slop. And so in order to get really elite output from the AI, you need to not just tell it exactly what you want, but you need to say it so specifically that there is no room for ambiguity about what you want. You got to tell it all the things that you don't want to make it clear what you do want. And so the sort of sub skill there, is that you have to be able to imagine with a lot of specificity what is the output you want, which favors domain expertise, right? If you are an expert in a field, whether that's law or medicine or whatever, accounting, you can probably better imagine the output you're looking for than someone who is sort of naively, right, not a lawyer, but using ChatGPT as their lawyer. Like the problem is like they're not going to be able to describe the document they need in good enough fidelity. So anyway, detail and specificity on the prompts is sort of the first half of the secret sauce. And then the other half of the secret sauce is skills. Skills are different than prompts. Prompts are about getting context and sort of a description into the model. Skills are really about procedure. They tell the model, for tasks that you do repeatedly, first do step A, then step B, then step C. And there too, like, you need to be really specific and state the obvious. But there are all sorts of tips and tricks where you can work with the model to create incredibly good work output just by calling a prompt. So, an example is I look at a lot of contracts and I review those contracts. And so I have a contract review skill that knows all of the things to look for in a contract. It knows how I want things formatted in Microsoft Word. It knows exactly what kind of code it should write based on sort of trial and error. I've gone back and forth, how to manipulate the Word doc so that I get clean red lines the first time, that I want the track changes attributed to me and not to Claude, that I want it to check afterwards. And then, I mentioned that a lot of my skills end with this instruction that I have found to Claude to think about if I passed this work product to a client as is there anything in here that would embarrass me? And I've found that like for at least the smart, like for Opus in particular, right? If you're like Ken and you're using Sonnet, this maybe the model's too stupid, but
not going to make it.
For Opus, like it's built around this constitution that Anthropic created. And so it like has something that mimics a conscience. And when you talk to it in a way, you can watch its internal thought process. And when I say, make sure you're not going to embarrass me, it says stuff like, this is a really important client for Zack. We shouldn't embarrass him. Let's make sure to check the footnotes and the citations or whatever. And I found that's actually more thorough and works better than if I just listed out all the things that I wanted it to do. And you can kind of encode that into skills. And the magic thing about skills or the other words, plugins, which is the Claude Cowork version of this, is you can use your work as a reinforcement learning environment to make those skills and plugins better. The way I created them in the first place was I got good enough at prompting that I had a month or two worth of just like good back and forth with Claude. Then Anthropic released this 33-page PDF explaining how to make custom skills. I said, wow, that's 33 pages. I don't have the attention span for that. So I gave it to Claude and I said, look at every chat you and I have had, back to the beginning of time. Read this 33-page skills PDF, think carefully, and then pitch me the 5 skills you think you can build for me. They're going to make my life better and make my work life easier. And it did like a pretty great job out of the box. I said, great. And then we went back and forth a bit and I said, okay, go build the skills. And then boom, I have these 5 skills that just do things automatically. And then after that, like every time I notice the skill does something good, but counterintuitive, I like stop Claude. I say, all right, let's analyze what happened here, why this went well, and let's update the skill so this happens more often. And then when something goes poorly or like takes longer than it should, or the model's really struggling, I stop Claude and I say, listen, this didn't go so well. Let's analyze what happened poorly here. Please update the skill so this happens less often or this gets fixed. And the usefulness of those skills then compounds over time. So the piece I wrote, you can find on my X account. It's called The Input Layer. It goes into more detail on all of this, but it's really sort of like a more granular step-by-step guide about how, like, what I think it means to use AI well, sort of at the moment we're in. And, I really do think like this is the skill of the future, right? We joke a lot on the podcast about like the permanent underclass and whatever. I think the good news is like some of these things I'm pointing to
about the permanent underclass.
Yeah, all right. I don't know if you want us to escape the permanent underclass, read my article. I'll just leave it there.
And use Opus, or else you'll be mercilessly criticized.
Right, Zack. I quote tweeted you, and I said, "Look, I've been using this to do my schoolwork, and I've built sort of, I've built skills to basically codify like processes that I was doing over and over again, like reading particular readings or like developing discussion questions for a particular class where we were doing that on a regular basis, and it's not only saved me a lot of time and made me more efficient, but I think it's actually heightened my sort of like intellectual capacity here, right? Because it will do a lot of the sort of grunt work and things that take, mental capacity. And then that frees me up to do the sort of higher level analysis, think about the questions or the output that it spit out to me, and then iterate with Claude on those things. And I've seen just enormous returns, in my schoolwork. And I actually was having dinner with a friend last night, and she's like, I've been using Claude, just the like free chat version, and like it's amazing. Like it's so much better than ChatGPT. And I was like, let me give you like a one up here. Like upgrade your account to the pro account, use co-work. And then I basically asked Claude to build like a getting started guide based on like everything that I had done with Claude to build out my set of skills. And I gave her kind of some of the basic skills that I've been using for particular tasks, as we study the same thing. And all she has to do is basically put this MD file into Claude, and it's going to walk her through like, 0 to 1. And she's going to have like huge returns with very little input. And so, I think we're just at this really cool phase where if you're kind of ahead of the curve here, like you're willing to kind of go out on the frontier a bit, and it's not even that crazy, right? You're like, Claude, use this 33-page PDF and like, take the things that we've already done and build skills out of it. But for someone who's like, I'm using free ChatGPT, like her mind's going to be blown. It's going to be like revolutionary to her. And for me, it's been kind of a slower burn. Like there's definitely been moments where I'm like, holy shit. But for her, it's just going to be like, oh my God, like this is insane.
Yeah. I mean, I two things. Like one, sort of the analogy I use in the piece is like the skill is like talking to a genie. You need to learn how to do the very specific wish, right? Like the classic genie story is like you wish for something, but like it turns out the way you phrased it, if you literally get that thing, it's really bad, right? You like wish for $1 million and $1 million falls out of the sky and hits you on the head, whatever. That's what you need to think about with AI, right? You just need to be very literal but like the skill is just speaking English to a box and making wishes, and then it's awesome. And like that, everyone can learn to do that. Like it's really not so hard. And the second thing, I think like using AI for your schoolwork is like a great example of this. There are two ways people are using AI right now, right? There is using AI to cheat on your homework, right? Or, the like more common example you see online is like AI slop. And what that is, and like we're awash in it right now in both, is just pointing Claude at something and being like, do this without using your brain at all. And a lot of people are going to be tempted to do that. And I would have been very tempted to do that if I were in school. But like that will make you dumber, right? That is just like the worst form of brain rot. And like, that is a waste. And like, you're going to be the perfect underclass. Like, I'm sorry, like it's no good. And when you do this, like everyone on LinkedIn has read a million versions of AI slop, which looks like AI slop. And what that is someone doing a 1-sentence prompt asking for something. The important thing here, whether you're doing homework or you're doing writing or you're doing work, is you actually still need to do all of the cognitive labor you would have done if you don't have AI. You can just do it in whatever way best suits you, whether that is talking into your phone or typing or outlining or literally whatever version of it is, writing with a fountain pen on a piece of paper and then taking a picture of it. And after you're done with all that hard cognitive work, then you point the AI at the output of the cognitive work and it does all the grunt work for you. And that is, I think, what you're describing. And like that really is just incredible leverage. But the people on the one hand who are like, oh, this is great, I don't need to use my brain anymore. Like that's not going to work out well for you. And like the people who insist that like all AI use is slop, right? When my first like couple articles came out, people would put it through like a slop detector and it would come out, 90% written by it. Yeah, I used AI to write my piece about using AI. Congratulations, Sherlock, right? But like the important thing is like, was there like careful human thought and effort that went into this, whether or not you're using AI, and that makes a huge difference. And I think really is going to be sort of the like K-shaped separation of like, probably everyone's going to use AI, but like, do you use your brain or not in addition to that? Yeah.
Ken, are you using your brain or just Sonnet?
So I'll be honest, I've used AI. I use a lot of AI, but I've been hesitant to do. And it's just because of my background and like having it beaten into me for 2 decades is you protect your computer from anything it gives it out. Anything you protect your computer from any outside influence as best you can, and that you control that influence in a way that's very, very structured. Honestly, it's a big psychological shift for me to give an AI that is still on some level it's not experimental, it's still evolving and developing, to give it access to something on my computer. Not that there's anything sensitive on my computer, but nonetheless, it's just years and years of government training. But I've been working more and more skills. But I've been benefiting from the power of AI for a bit. I do see now, though, the value. I've been tinkering with it for the past couple of days. When you give it access even to a small corner of your computer where you curate the content that it can use, it's pretty powerful. So yeah, it's been a great learning experience. And I've gone through, like, similarly with you, Zach, and your friend. I had the same discussion with my daughter. She's got a Claude account now. And just kind of walk her through. This is how you use it. You have to learn how to use it, because you don't want to become part of the permanent underclass. Or
friends don't let friends become part of the permanent underclass.
Friends don't let friends underclass. Exactly. So yeah.
Okay, let's get into the Bitcoin policy conversation, because I think that's probably what most people came here for.
It's not the yucks.
Yeah, right.
Jokes.
Ken, you were on the Hill this morning with some members of BPI and also some industry folks from Coinbase, River, and Block, talking about the de minimis exemption. So we talked last week about the TFTC tweet that went around, the scuttlebutt that we all saw on X. And I think this is really a product of that, right? And BPI was in a position to pick up on that and say, hey, Coinbase, we'll take you at your word. And will you come do this briefing with us on the Hill and talk about some real data that supports the Bitcoin de minimis exemption? So I'm curious, I wasn't there. I'm curious how that went. I'm curious if there were any real significant takeaways, and then also, your perception of how that was received on the Hill.
Yeah, so it was, in fairness to everybody who attended and spoke, it was closed press and Chatham House rules. But it's we've been talking about this all week. We did gather. I would say there's probably 60 Hill staff were there, from bipartisan, from both parties, there to hear us talk about de minimis and why it's important. And whatever scuttlebutt happened over the past couple of weeks between prominent Bitcoin commentators and Coinbase, Coinbase certainly showed up and sort of put to rest any concerns that they were not actually supporting de minimis exemptions for Bitcoin. And of course, you had Block and River there, two Bitcoin native companies that just did a great job, as did Coinbase. So it was great. There are a lot of questions. You get a good flavor for the dispersion of the kinds of offices you get. Certain issues tend to attract certain kinds of offices, whether it's partisan or just different interests. And we had a pretty good cross section today, which is important. But what's really interesting, and this is sort of building on our AI discussion, was how far AI agents and agentic commerce has moved the needle on de minimis thinking, not just for crypto, but for Bitcoin. We've been beating the drum on the fact that stablecoins are just they're not chain agnostic. They're not, which makes them, in my mind, a suboptimal solution for crypto. And there's a lot. Every payment company in the world, Coinbase, Google, they're all developing AI payment mechanisms that probably function really well. But at the end of the day, though, those still end up being choke points that require a certain kind of stablecoin on a certain chain, which will necessarily limit the scope of what they can accomplish. And I don't think we want to build, there's already enough centralization in the world. What we don't need is to further centralize, our online lives through financial tunnels that require us to, or sort of push us toward one version, one stablecoin, or one commercial provider or another. And it's been pretty cool. You watch the wheels turning in Hill staff that you talk about Bitcoin and that very point, centralization of payments and what agentic commerce is going to look like. And you get nods like, yeah, Bitcoin maybe actually makes sense because for all the reasons, right? We've been talking about. So it's been really cool. And as we've talked about, we were kind of learning as we just, spent the first couple minutes talking about AI. We've been learning. This has been evolving, and we've been sort of thinking through it actively. And at real time in some of these offices, the questions we're getting asked, or sort of driving sort of research we're doing. They're raising new ideas. It's been really great, and it's really cool to watch in real time, because we joke, right? You rarely get like tech and legislation at the same place. And this was, I promise you, this was completely coincidental, right? Congress didn't plan to do digital tax, crypto tax, because of agentic commerce. They did not, but it happens to fall in the same place. And the argument that we need to get this right now, rather than like try to redo it next year, is key. But again, for us at BPI, and I've said this to staff, we want to establish a precedent that Bitcoin can be used as money. We can quibble over the amount, whether it's $300, $600, or $10,000 of de minimis per year. It doesn't really matter. I mean, of course it matters, but we want the precedent set that Bitcoin can be used as money, because we don't have to refight this battle next year if it ends up being just stablecoins. So yeah, but I've been really sort of there's been not a lot of reasons to be bullish lately on anything. This is actually going to be bullish on crypto tax, believe it or not.
That's awesome. I'm curious, right? So presumably a lot of these staffers are also thinking a lot about market structure, and that's obviously the button topic. Do you get the sense that they're kind of juggling these plates well, or do you think like the scuttlebutt on Twitter was enough to kind of get some folks in the room? Like I'm just curious, like were they there because they were like, hey, this issue is like coming up quickly, and we got to make sure we know what we're talking about, or was it like, hey, Coinbase is in the room and BPI is in the room and Block's in the room and River, right? Like I'm just curious, like what drove people there and how kind of interested in the topic they actually are.
I mean, there's a little bit of that. But you have the people that the staffers that worked on market structure, on banking committee, agriculture committee. They're not the same staffers working on tax issues, which are ways and means in the House and finance in the Senate. So yeah, some of the sort of well-known pro digital asset offices, of course, represented, and they have staffers work on these issues specifically. But we're actually meeting a whole new crop of staffers who are tax experts, who we never talked to before, and that are getting their first taste of crypto lobbying, because now there's crypto tax legislation flowing around making its way around the corridors, and tax staffers are the one who are writing these bills. The Ways and Means Committee has never had to deal with crypto lobbyists before. Now they're getting it. Yep. That's okay, because there's some of the fatigue because the same people who did Genius and market structure, maybe it's better that there's some new staffers, some new blood that aren't as sort of scarred and traumatized and just honestly freaking tired of talking about these bills on the Hill. This is a very sort of different cross section of Hill staffers that are. Tax staffers are unique. You're unique, right? I mean, if you're a tax legislation specialist, you're wired in a certain way. You're different than the crypto guys who support crypto and all kind of stuff. It's a very different crew. So it requires sort of different way to approach them. But there's actually a bipartisan sort of desire, or at least some kind of enthusiasm for getting some kind of crypto tax done. We'll see, but I'm overall pretty happy with at least how the discussion is going. It doesn't mean that we're going to get a bill, but at least the discussion is trending in the right direction. So yay.
That's awesome. And last question here, and then we'll move on. I think if I understood correctly, like the point of, or one of the points of this particular briefing was to look at data, right? And one thing that we've heard a lot from staffers is like, hey, we want to see data that people are actually using Bitcoin for buying their coffee, right? Like as long as it's, a narrative, then they're kind of like, oh, okay, well, this is cool. Like it sounds good that people are using Bitcoin to buy coffee, but like, are they actually using Bitcoin to buy coffee? And so, was there a lot of data that was being discussed at this briefing, and do you think that was compelling?
Yeah, there was. I mean, it wasn't very granular, but there are a lot of charts and numbers. But I think the key to that, the answer is yes, and that's reflected in the fact that these companies now are required to file 1099-D forms with the IRS that outline each transaction, and they are expecting lots, like millions and millions and millions of 1099-Ds are going to hit the IRS, this year, next year, and this is only going to grow exponentially. This is one of the problems. The IRS is just not equipped to handle 100 million, 200 million. How many individual transactions are going to occur? A lot. And so this is part of the discussion about de minimis, is you can take out a whole class of these small transactions. Yeah, I mean, again, we're all going to Vegas, right, in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Do we really need to do I need to do capital gains, calculations because I decided to buy, my sort of annual Bitcoin conference T-shirt? I don't think so. And it's not just that, of course, but that's sort of where the argument's getting is trending, and this is where some Democrats are starting to say, yeah, maybe you're right, because the burden on the IRS is just going to be ridiculous, and they're not ready for it.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it sounds like that went really well. Big shout out to
thank you,
everyone.
Coinbase. Thank you, Block. Thank you, River, for joining us. It was great.
100%, and also great work to everybody at BPI who pulled that off. I know it was a short turnaround, so big win there. Ken, I think there was a sort of like a peace, so-called like peace deal, like a 15-point like peace deal that came out of the White House, maybe a day or two ago, and that detailed again like what the U.S. was looking for, and then I think Iran circulated something in return that was like, hey, we have these demands. So I'm curious on your thoughts on that. It seems like based on what I was reading, there's like no agreement there whatsoever, that they're just on completely different pages. And then the other thing I'd like to hear from you is, on the kind of like Strait of Hormuz things, because I've just seen so many different theories, right? About like, hey, there's the kind of like toll station where if you're transporting, goods from the Gulf to Russia or China or Southeast Asia, like you can go through, but you're gonna have to pay a fee. But if you're going to the US, like you're probably gonna get taken out or something like that, right? And that there's like insurance on the boats going through, and all the ones who are sitting on the way out are they're trying to get insured before they go through. So I'm just curious if you have a kind of take on this about cutting through the noise about what's going on there. But there's a lot to unpack there. I'll let you take it however you want.
Yeah, I think overall the Iranians are just not ready to let Trump off the hook. They think they're hanging in there. It's always a pain. It's always a half a war is like pain tolerance, right? I think they're thinking that they have more pain. They're taking more damage, but they have proportionally much higher pain tolerance than President Trump does for all kinds of reasons. So I think they're banking on that. Some of their demands like reparations is just not going to happen, and even the toll issue, right? Remember, a strait has two sides to it. They don't control both sides of the strait. I've read that's an absolutely impossible deal for everybody else, all those other countries that export from the Gulf. So I think it's them making it hard for Trump to get his sort of enough of a win to be able to walk out. I think the most interesting thing that popped up this week was that there have been reports that I guess there's been talks going on being sponsored by Pakistan. Actually, JD Vance might be going to Pakistan for some kind of meeting. They've said previously that they are unwilling to talk to Secretary Rubio because they were having negotiations and he betrayed them and he bombed them and this kind of thing. But they trust Vance. This is what they're saying. So reflection on Vice President. It's just what the Iranians are saying, which is interesting for all kinds of reasons. The Iranians are smart and calculating, right? There's a real reason why they're bringing, they're insisting that JD Vance be the face of the discussions. I'm not gonna speculate what those are. I think, but they definitely have their own calculations for that. And I don't think it's because they think Mark Rubio betrayed them. Maybe in part, but I don't think so. But no, I think we're in for a few more weeks. I mean, we still see like we're still, we have 5,000 Marines are on their way on a boat. The 82nd Airborne is being deployed to the region. These are when you have Marine Expeditionary Forces, 82nd Airborne, and when you're doing sort of frontier operations, these are the teams that get sent out to do it. So he's bringing in the players he needs. What's interesting though is clearly no one thought it would go this long because these assets were stationed far away. So there's a sort of sense of buying time. We have deals, 5 points, 5 more days. We're going to bomb Carg Island. We're not going to bomb Carg Island for 5 more days. Buying time for actual additional forces to arrive in the region. I still who knows? But whether the talks happen in Pakistan or not. But ultimately, I think that the Iranians are just not willing to let Trump off the hook yet. I think they want to come through this with the regime relatively intact. Again, my thoughts always been if they survive this intact and defiant and with some operational capability, they win. The smaller party always wins if they just don't die, right? This is the nature of these wars. And they are, we can't underestimate the nature of the regime. And think most of the leadership in this regime are still the same generation that actually participated in the 1979 revolution. They're slowly, with the help of the Israelis, they're getting more and more turnover. But all the leadership, a lot of it's been killed though, participated in that. So you still have deep revolutionary roots in senior Iranian leaders. Maybe the new generation will be more or less. That's really not my area of expertise. But that generation that participated in the revolution in 1979 are still the leader. Is still leadership today, in large part. Again, evolving because of Israeli things of Israeli operations. But so it's dangerous to underestimate their commitment to fighting this out. That doesn't mean everybody's going to go along with them. But I think they view this as existential because it is. And they've been egging for this fight since 1979. So we'll see. But I don't anticipate them making it easy for President Trump to back out of this and say we won. It's just that they've got other ideas.
Yeah. Zack, I want to go to you and just see if you have any thoughts here. If you have a kind of outlook about what the proceedings will look like.
I think the moving Ken definitely understands the minutia better than I do. Where it looks to me is like the administration wants an out, but they need an out that saves face, and they care about the economy, but they also care about like being able to sell what was this all for. And I don't know, like the Strait of Hormuz really matters to the economy piece. I think the uranium really matters, and what the regime does really matters to the saving face piece. And so in order to work, I think the Iranians would have to, just like from a optics perspective, at least give a decent amount. It can't be that they're defiant, that I don't know that Trump's going to let that happen. In order for the Israelis to stop, there's a certain amount of pressure the U.S. can put on them, but I think they really do want a more pliant version of the regime. And, they seem to be taking the heavy lift on taking out the political leadership in Iran. And so I think if you left it to them, they would say, all right, we're going to keep doing intelligence and airstrikes until we get the Venezuela situation, where it probably they had hoped that they would have the results of like a revolt in the streets and like grassroots regime change. That's at least not happening yet. There's not like a lot of great signs that that's imminent, but if you kill enough people, maybe you get someone who is in the regime but is willing to commit to some sort of change or reform. The problem is like, how long is that going to take, and how much economic pain can be doled out before then? And so, and for Iran, like it seems like they kind of feel like they're winning, and so how much incentive do they have to take some sort of deal that they would view as sort of like a humiliation? When I put all those things together, I think the equilibrium is not boots on the ground, not a huge escalation, but continued hostilities for some amount more time, and maybe some attempt to have a different security posture around the Strait of Hormuz to try and mitigate the economic consequences. But I don't think the war is going to like end immediately.
Mm-hmm. Ken, anything to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, I agree with Zack. And just because the regime survives, and this is, we'll call it maybe round 2, hard to say, right? Maybe round 3, because it's the separate Israeli operation than our operation against the nuclear facilities. But, it doesn't mean, say hostilities do end, it doesn't mean that the regime survives 8 months from now. This is not going to, there's not going to be an on and off switch for this. There's going to be, severe social, economic problems inside Iran. The pressure, the social pressure among the Iranian people is not going to subside. You're still seeing videos coming out of Iran where like you have people cheering, strikes on government facilities. But there's still, and you can make the case that if this drags on too long, that some of that the support for the government could theoretically increase. But there's a solid, if not roughly 50% of Iranians would like to see this regime gone. again, it's been years and years of protests. So just because it doesn't disappear, before Memorial Day, doesn't mean it's here a year from now. But there's a lot of unknowns and instability that can occur between now and then.
Yeah. All right, Zach, I'm going to go to you now. There was some news that came out of our friends over at CoinCenter that Michael Llewellyn, who's I think broader kind of privacy digital assets developer, had a case, I think in Texas, where he was basically trying to fix the bad precedent that was set in the Tornado Cash and Samurai Wallet cases. And CoinCenter was obviously, quite involved in that. And I think, at some point BPI was considering getting involved in that. And the news was that the court basically dismissed that case. And the logic was that Michael did not face a credible threat of enforcement for publishing non-custodial privacy tools. And I'll let you get into the details, but I think my broad takeaway was they cited the Blanch memo, and they basically said like, hey, Trump DOJ is not going to go after developers like this. And from our perspective, it's like, well, that doesn't achieve the end that we were trying to achieve here, which is to fix the precedent. And so now, again, it really just turns back to clarity and the BRCA. So I'll let you run us through here, but seems sort of bearish, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a disappointing result. It's not the most surprising thing in the world. So what this was, it's an example of what's called impact litigation, where you bring a case, oftentimes against the government in order to specifically set precedent. It's not that there's you're totally focused on a specific actual ongoing thing. You're trying to do a lawsuit in order to get to a broader legal precedent. And then the most famous example of this is Brown versus Board of Education, where there were all of these sort of lower cases that made their way up to the Supreme Court case that desegregated schools. Always a challenge in impact litigation is going to be the standing question, right? In order to bring a case in federal court, you need standing. There needs to be a particular party that is correct to bring that case. There needs to be an actual case or controversy. The federal courts in the United States are not allowed to sort of decide things on spec as a philosophical or abstract matter. There needs to be an actual case or controversy. And that's always going to be kind of hard. Now, if you have a credible fear of imminent government action, that would do it. And so that was what was being litigated here, and where the court decided against Michael, who's, friend of the pod, good dude, backed by CoinCenter in this. At BPI, we discussed at some point doing a similar case, and we didn't in large part because of this case. It's interesting that they cited the Blanch memo. On the one hand, I suppose it's good that the government had to argue in this case that there's no credible threat that they would go after someone that would build the type of tool he said he wanted to build. On the other hand, it's a little bit frustrating and rich here for the government to say, oh no, there's no credible threat that someone would go after you for building a tool like this on the one hand, and then deciding to retry Roman Storm on the other hand. And, they will say, well, the facts are different in the Tornado Cash case because North Korea laundered a bunch of money through the Tornado Cash smart contracts. But I guess the whole point is these are really important, very technical cases that set extremely important precedent for the crypto industry and soon to be also the AI industry. And we need to get these right. And federal judges are, by and large, not really equipped to deal with the nuances of what non-custodial tools are. And if the government's position here is the only cases where there are standing to get this in front of the federal courts are where there are these really ugly facts about North Korea, we're going to get bad case law, right? The whole point of impact litigation is to find a really good example of a legal principle where the plaintiff, the person who's bringing the case, actually is, more, it is less sort of hairy than the cases the government brings where you have bad actors, right? You want someone who's more sympathetic. And so I think there should be more cases like this. We should think about doing that. Hopefully CoinCenter thinks about bringing another case. We can probably tweak the facts and find something that is closer to at least what the government is saying is outside. Like they're explicitly saying that the Tornado Cash case and the Samurai cases fell outside of the Blanch memo. That's why they declined to dismiss those cases after the Blanch memo came out. And so, I think if we just put some thought into like, what are the specific facts that led the DOJ to say these are outside the Blanch memo, we can maybe have a better shot at this. But disappointing result, not the most surprising thing in the world.
Interesting. If you had to kind of speculate, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, but if you had to kind of speculate about what the specific details, and I think you said with Tornado Cash, it was that North Korea was utilizing, the tool. Like what specific details do you think were what tipped the needle away from the Blanch memo for Michael?
Well, I mean, there's the like circumstantial stuff, and then there's like the legal argument, right? The circumstantial stuff in the Samurai case was what they tweeted. And in the Tornado Cash case is the involvement of North Korea. I think there's no question about that. What legal argument they would make to distinguish these things as outside of the Blanch memo. There might be some questions about like the use of like front ends in the Samurai wallet case. They would maybe point to the coordinated, like the CoinJoin coordinator, right? The server that they ran that was sort of the digital bulletin board. Now, for reasons we've discussed ad nauseum on this podcast, that's not money transmission, but that's a slightly different fact. And so you might want to, like, if you were to bring a new case, you would want a feature like that. I'm not super familiar with every facet of what Michael said he was trying to build, but that's sort of one potential. In the Tornado Cash case, they really tried to use each of the elements of Tornado Cash, not just the smart contracts, but the relayers and the token and everything sort of, and the front end, as sort of a like wider service that they were alleging. You could probably try and replicate that if you were doing a new case. I'm not sure, how much Michael's product touched that. But the question is going to be like, you want to pin the government down on like, okay, which parts of this are you saying fall under the Blanch memo and not? Another, I guess, like legal piece of this is when the Blanch memo came out, I don't know if the government would say they were required by the Blanch memo to do this, but the government dropped certain of the sub theories they had in both the Tornado Cash and Samurai Wallet cases that like came with a theory that the defendants needed to actually have money transmitter licenses. And so in the Samurai Wallet case, what they pled guilty to, and in the Tornado Cash case, what Roman Storm was found guilty of was sort of this Orwellian like subpart C of unlicensed money transmission that does not require you to have ever needed a license from anyone, state or federal. It is you knowingly transmitted money that was the proceeds of crime, or that you knew was the proceeds of crime. It doesn't require you to have intended to do that, right? Which would be like accomplice liability or money laundering. It's just you knowingly transmit funds. Now, it is wrong for either of them to be guilty of that because they didn't transmit funds. Again, as we've talked about ad nauseum, if you build a non-custodial tool, you're not transmitting anything. Your users are. But I guess in the Michael Llewellyn case, like if I'm steel manning the government's theory here, like why does the Blanch memo preclude like what almost anything he could do in a way that doesn't preclude in their theory Tornado Cash and Samurai? I'd say, well, he may be alleged that he's doing this non-custodial tool that looks a lot like Samurai Wallet and Tornado Cash, but he's not alleging that he is doing something that looks like transmitting funds that he knew were the proceeds of crime. Mm-hmm. And, if that's the government's theory, which, if I guess I'm now saying this on a podcast, but like if you were a smart government lawyer, I guess that's the argument you'd make. It does put future litigation like this in a tough spot where you have to have that fact pattern. And that's going to be tough. Now, I guess to bring it back to like, how would you counter that from like the plaintiff side and impact litigation? You would want something that is like so broad, a tool that's so broad and so widely used, or would be so widely used, where you'd say, look, inevitably, just like criminals use Facebook and WhatsApp, inevitably, some criminals are going to use this. And I think the government is going to say that because I know that some criminal would use this, that I would be knowingly transmitting their funds. But because it's non-custodial, I'm not transmitting funds. And like that's, I think, how you'd phrase it if you were doing this again.
Right.
But hopefully from some of this sort of like back and forth, you get a sense of like these are the sort of legal issues you'd wrestle with.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful, and I think it also shows like the challenge of bringing another case that might actually achieve the outcome we're looking for, right? Because let's say you are a person who knows that your tool was being used by a bad actor, right? Of course, you're not going to like come out and volunteer yourself to go on trial.
No, it had to be something that was broad enough where you could like really credibly say, inevitably, this is going to be used, and then you're going to say that I knew.
Right. Ken, I want to give you a chance to weigh in here. I don't know if you have anything to add, but we'll move on after.
Yeah, no, just that this is still a legislative issue. It's interesting. So there's actually, I mean, we talked a lot about the BRCA inside market structure, still important, still sort of under review. But in the House side, there's actually a bill introduced by a bipartisan bill by Ben Klein from Virginia and Zoe Lofgren from California, a Democrat, called the Promoting Innovation in Blockchain Development Act. Just introduced last month. It takes BRCA and goes a little bit further, and it specifies that software developers cannot be treated as money service providers, transmitters rather. So it's interesting though that there's still an appetite in Congress to take these issues on. The fact that Ben Klein, a conservative Republican from Virginia, and Zoe Lofgren, liberal Democrat from California, have gotten together and co-sponsored this bill together it's I'm actually pretty bullish on that. Now, whether this bill goes anywhere, I don't know, but it's certainly a great signal. As you know, like Senator Lummis and Senator Wyden reintroduced the BRCA in the Senate as sort of a signpost for market structure negotiations. You've already got Tom Emmer and Richie Torres, who introduced BRCA in the House previously last year. And now we have Ben Klein and Zoe Lofgren introducing an even more aggressive bill together in the House. So these issues are still front and center. People recognize that without these protections, the industry doesn't go anywhere. So we're still in this fight. Market structure is still a thing. But check out Ben Klein and check out Zoe Lofgren. They've always been supportive of sort of the community, but they've never sort of stepped up in a leadership role before. So it's great to see new members take on a leadership role and sort of take these issues seriously. And this is not hard. This is complicated stuff. So it's pretty cool.
Bullish. Yeah, check that stuff out. And, obviously BRCA is still in the Senate right now. So if you have not yet, make sure to ring your senator. We'll keep saying that until the BRCA is done.
Right.
And then we'll move on to the next thing. Okay, fantastic. I'll open this to both of you. I don't know which of you is going to want to weigh in on this. But we got some news out of Kentucky yesterday that this concerning piece of hardware wallet or self-custody legislation had sort of been walked down. I don't know that it was walked away from completely, but the previous version, which would have basically required that hardware wallets install some kind of backdoor, has been again, kind of taken off the table, at least in its most extreme sense. So, open to either of you. What happened here and why is this a big win?
Our head of policy did most of the heavy lifting on this one, so turn it over to
breaking. No, this is one of the rare state law things we did. No, it's great. I mean, this was an attempt to do something pretty bad here, which was force a backdoor into hardware wallets. And it was like the bill it was being appended to was a sort of a more narrow thing about avoiding sort of fraud or extortion with crypto ATMs. And this sort of like extra thing did not belong there. And so I'm glad it's been walked down. That seems like just obviously the right call.
Ken, anything to add?
Yeah, no, again, we don't do a lot of state stuff, but when you see sort of egregious bills, especially if they're not in like New York or California, in states that nominally should be supportive of what Bitcoiners are looking for, it's good to jump on. So yeah, we were lucky. This was flagged for us. Zack Shapiro did some, I don't know, was it Claude co-work magic? But it was magic. It put some pretty good research together that I think helped turn the tide. So big score.
Yeah. No, that was awesome to see. I think it was a nice quick response too. We found out about this earlier this week, and mobilized the team. We made some noise on Twitter. Thank you to all the plebs out there who talked about this and retweeted and signal boosted, because that certainly played a big role in this. And super bullish. And I think the thing to underscore here, and I do want to go back to both of you on this, is this to me seems like another example of, again, a misunderstanding about the technology, and the attempt to sort of apply frameworks from the past 100 years of regulation about having an intermediary at all points who could reverse something like this, and of course we know that's not how this technology works. So I think we know that this kind of stuff is going to keep happening. And so the question here is it going to take things like this getting introduced and Bitcoiners on Twitter and Zack Shapiro writing letters to keep these things from blowing out of proportion? Or is there kind of a larger effort here, or just sort of changing of the times that might lessen the concern over this?
I think a lot of these state issues are they're very locally driven. I think this one in Kentucky was driven by some specific circumstances, and then hardware wallets are sort of 201 level big Bitcoin stuff, right? Where people have enough trouble understanding the basics. Hardware wallet where your Bitcoin does not reside, by the way, it's a signing device. When you get to explain that to legislators who have constituents calling, have had bad experiences, maybe had personal experiences, all kinds of stuff happens. When you try to walk them through that, it just takes a lot more education. So we're still early, but these sorts of things are going to pop up. But I think they tend to be very, very locally driven, and not necessarily. I don't think this was outside actors coming in to take advantage of something in Kentucky. I think this was just sort of local politics, kind of gone awry.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Last topic, and then if we have some time, maybe we can talk a little bit more geopolitics. The update that was coming out or being talked about earlier this week was some early previews of the latest stablecoin yield language in the Clarity Act, or the market structure legislation in the Senate. From the reactions that I was reading, and big shout out to Eleanor Terra at Crypto in America. They do a great job covering these things. There was a mixed response, and this has been kind of in the works for the past 2 months. The White House is involved. We had our friend Patrick Witt. He sent a fun tweet out today. So Ken, I'm sure you saw that, and you can comment on that. But yeah, it was interesting to me, and I'm curious on thoughts here about the fact that from what was being reported on, it doesn't seem like there was actually a ton of movement, and that the banks are still kind of coming out ahead on this. But again, that's my low IQ take here.
Well, so this was Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina and Senator Brooks from Maryland have been trying to play peacemaker between the crypto lobby and the banks for months now. Tom Tillis, of course, Senator Brooks is a freshman senator. She's on banking. Tom Tillis is retiring this year. And they've been wanting to play peacemaker rather for a bit. I don't know. I mean, there's parts of this agreement I think even the White House pointed this out, like economic equivalence. What does economic equivalence of a bank deposit mean for stablecoin rewards that are not really interests, and they're kind of like rewards, but they can't just be rewards. You have to do something to get the rewards. It's complicated. Who knows? I mean, everybody. I think there's been enough pressure on both parties where nobody's willing to step up right now and be like, we hate this, we oppose it. Just because there's been every time that's happened in the past, people, both sides have been beaten up about this. Is this going to stick? I don't know. It's not. It's very. I mean, I defer to Zack on sort of the languages here, but it's very squishy, like economic equivalence. And this is, I think even Patrick pointed this out. Maybe just the White House. What does that mean? What is the economic equivalent of a deposit in a bank? I don't know. I don't think anyone likes it because it's it's hard to understand. It's hard to quantify. More importantly, it's hard to quantify. So I can immediately see, if this ever gets into law, there'll be challenges to it because it's not really. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be very clear in its intent, other than to like have the pain stop around this conversation. I think that's the only intent that's really clear is that like, these two senators are trying. I give them both credit. They both have good teams, and they're well meaning. But yeah, I think this just opens the door to a lot of issues if this bill's actually signed with this language in it.
Mm-hmm. Zach, I think you saw Patrick's tweet as well. That I was referring to the one where he was kind of like,
football,
hey,
right? Quarterback.
Yeah, the football one where it's like, you've got your window here, and at some point the quarterback's got to let go of the ball. Zach, I'm curious on your reading of that.
Yeah, it's a subtweet of Coinbase, right? He's saying like, you need to stop negotiating here. He's pointing out, listen, like this is our shot to get the ball in the end zone and get clarity on all of the tokens they list, whether securities or commodities, and developer protections that are important for their base L2. And, maybe let's not die on the hill of perfect language around stablecoin yield.
And are you in agreement with Ken on this kind of squishy language that he was referring to?
Yeah, I don't think it matters, right? Like my honest assessment of the whole stablecoin yield drama is that like Coinbase is correct on the merits that people should be able to get yield on stablecoins. The problem is that actually is frightening to banks, and perhaps for good reason, because it sucks to deal with a bank, and it, like earning yield on USDC and Coinbase is much more convenient. And so maybe they will lose deposits, and the banks have no incentive to back down on this. They're not going to be good actors. But I think Patrick Witt's point is also correct, which is like, we need to get this done now. If the Democrats win in 2028, we are not going to get a market structure bill through that deals with the really important unanswered regulatory questions in the digital asset space. However, we do have the Genius Act has already passed. We're already going to have some amount of diffusion of stablecoins. And while it's hard for the public to wrap their mind around the security versus commodity distinction and the custodial, non-custodial distinction, it's not hard for them to wrap their mind around what it would mean to earn yield on stablecoins. And so that is just absolutely a battle we can fight another day. And so the efficient outcome here is to cave to the banks, even though the banks are being unreasonable and just protecting their territory. And then let's have the political fight some other day about, do we want to amend this all to allow, either rewards to be paid through third parties like Coinbase, or just allow stablecoin issuers to pay yield directly. That just seems like something you can get popular support for in the future, regardless of who's in office.
Yeah. I am kind of curious, Ken, on your thoughts on the deposit drain argument. Zack, that's a great point. I haven't thought about it that way. Right, like take the win on 90% of what you've been handed, and then relitigate the rest at another point when the rest isn't kind of hanging in the balance. But Ken, on the deposit drain issue, right? Like I always understood that stablecoins were being primarily used like not as sort of stationary deposits, right? That they're primarily kind of cross-border payments, or people in wherever, like South Sudan are doing their little like circular economy thing and trading cash for Tether, whatever, right? That there's very little kind of like US demand for something like this. Like it's certainly possible theoretically that somebody's like, hey, I want to keep some stable coins and on Coinbase and earn 3% or 4%. But the data doesn't bear that out right now. Am I wrong about that?
So I don't know. I kind of agree. Yeah, I think part of it is the banks thought they just had an incomplete victory during Genius Act, right? When they did get direct yield banned. Well, banned was disallowed. Banned is a strong word. Disallowed in Genius, and I think they were sort of flustered that this issue's popped up again. I'll be honest, I don't know exactly how much money, for example, Coinbase is making. Yeah, again, think of the state of the bank of certainly community banks, right? Like if you look at the graph of the number of small banks in the United States, it looks like well, looks kind of like the Bitcoin chart, like, over the past 6 weeks, right? Like, not lately, but, since the beginning of the year, right? It's just, that sector is shrinking, because, the big banks are winning out, and, people are moving to bigger banks because they just offer more options, not necessarily more yield, but more options. And I think my understanding is a lot of the opposition came from the community banks, the small banks, which is again how you got bipartisan support for this, because these banks are important in parts of the country where red states, in the upper Midwest and out west, and I think they just see is yet another threat to their continuing, whether or not it's real. It's just times have been tough on community banks, and I think they view this as just yet another challenge, another hill to climb, to stay viable.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see what happens. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there hasn't been a public text released yet. It was sort of what I was reading was like 30-minute appointments for folks to go in and read the text, and then they couldn't leave with it. So I guess we'll have to see, kind of the entirety of it when that becomes public.
Yeah, we'll see if someone slips Eleanor Terrett, the full draft, the full bill language. We'll see.
All right. Yeah, you never know. Doesn't seem out of the picture for this kind of situation right now.
Right. Printed, photocopied, no watermark, all the tricks to, circulating documents in DC not supposed to circulate.
Right. Okay. Thank you both. Thank you everyone listening, and see you next week.
Thank you, chat.
See you, chat.
See you, chat.